Hi, I'm Bob French. Today, I want to spend some time looking at one of those crucial decisions that often gets shoved to the background a little bit. I'm talking about deciding on how much you want to spend in retirement. This is probably one of, if not the most important decision you can make in the financial planning process. Put bluntly, it's kind of hard to build out a plan without knowing where you want to go. Now, there's the 4% rule or 3.5% rule and all the other distribution rules floating around out there. But they're reactive. You have this much when you retire, or you currently have this much, and you need to figure out how to make it last. But if you're still in the accumulation period, if you haven't retired yet, you still have at least some level of control and can work towards the retirement that you want, not just the one you'll end up with. So how do you go about figuring out what you want to do in retirement? Well, that's a pretty personal decision. Everyone wants something different from retirement. For instance, I have a friend whose parents are planning on retiring soon, and they wanted to go live in France for a year or two. It's definitely on hold for a bit now, but fundamentally, their retirement will look pretty different from someone who wants to sit on the porch, drink lemonade, play the occasional game of golf, and hang out with the grandkids. There's nothing wrong with either approach. It just comes down to what you want out of retirement. And there's no foolproof way of figuring this out either. It takes real soul searching and just spending some time with yourself. And if you're married, having some long conversations with your spouse. You really don't want to find out 2 weeks into retirement that you guys had very different plans for the next 30 or 40 years. Things could get a bit awkward there. But from a planning perspective, there are really two main approaches. Well, 2.5 approaches actually. The half approach is to just guess a big round number and go from there. Now, to be honest, I shouldn't be completely dismissive on this one. You'll probably get into at least the right general ballpark, and it is better to have the number to plan against, even if it's not quite right, than to just wing the entire thing. But the two approaches I want to focus on are the replacement ratio and the budgeting approach. Let's start with the replacement ratio. What this approach does is assume that you'll be spending a certain percentage of your pre-retirement income in retirement. Though this obviously means that you'll need to estimate how much you think you'll make at the end of your career. There's always going to be some guesswork. You just need to pick where the guesses are. Generally, this approach is better for people who have a somewhat nebulous idea of what they want in retirement. So it's usually more appropriate for people a little further out from retirement, but not quite in the pick a semi-random number out of thin air territory either. But as you get a better sense of what you want, you can refine this number. The general rule of thumb is that you'll probably want somewhere between, call it 70 to 85% of your pre-retirement income in retirement. This is great in itself. You can eyeball it, pick a target, and go. But there's actually something interesting to think about here. As your income increases, your replacement ratio tends to drop. Folks with higher pre-retirement incomes tend to spend a higher proportion of their income on things that will stop, or at least decrease, after retirement. Some directly work-related things like commuting costs or dry cleaning if you wear a suit every day, or the cost of lunch if you buy lunch regularly. But you've also got taxes. You'll probably have a lower income, so your taxes will decrease as well. And probably the biggest line item is actually saving for retirement. Say you're saving the standard 10% of your income. Well, even if you keep everything else exactly the same, which you won't do, you're already down to 90% immediately after retirement. You'll need to look at your spending and try and make some guesses about what will likely go away after retirement, or failing that, pick a number somewhere in that 70 to 85% range and make sure it feels reasonable. And then refine your spending goals through time. Just be sure to try and be conservative with your shot in the dark there. The other approach I want to touch on is the budgeting approach. This is for when you have a more clear sense of what you want your retirement to look like. Essentially, what you want to do is price your retirement out to a reasonable degree at least. So for instance, that couple that I mentioned earlier who wanted to spend a year or two in France, they would have gone through the process of figuring out roughly what it would cost to live there. Housing, basic essentials, and all the discretionary spending that they would do, which I assume would include exploring other parts of Europe while they're there. And then they would need to sort out, the rest of their retirement. Now, it's important to recognize that even though we call this the budgeting approach, it's not about getting things right down to the penny. That level of precision isn't really desirable in the planning stages. If your plan works when you spend $80,000 a year, but not $80,001 a year, then your plan doesn't work. And we'll leave aside the false precision issues as well. Generally, you want a little slop in your numbers, and you want to be consistently rounding up. One other thing to remember is that what you want to spend in retirement will change through time. There's an idea that you may have heard of called the retirement spending smile. This is based on the principle that you'll be a lot more active and thus spend more in your early retirement. Slow down a little bit as you get a bit older, and as you approach the end of your retirement, your spending will pick back up again with healthcare costs. Everyone's smile will look a little bit different, but this is a pretty typical pattern when you look at the data. And it's something you may want to include in your planning. The last thing that I want to point out is that however sure you are that you know what you want to do with your retirement, you're probably wrong. 30 to 40 years is a long time. Are you the same person that you were 30 years ago or even 15 years ago? Do you want the same things now that you did back then? It's the same principle here. You'll change in retirement, and that's a good thing. But in the meantime, it means that you don't need to get everything exactly right. Get it into the right ballpark and round up, but remember, it's a moving target, just like pretty much everything else in retirement planning. So now that we have our spending targets, what do we do with them? First, remember that as we just discussed, these are estimates and are not static. Retirement planning is an iterative process that you're constantly adjusting to fit your needs. But the more direct answer is that you use your planned spending to orient your retirement income plan. Figure out what resources you need to have to generate that income, and then figure out how you get those resources. What do you need to be doing today to bridge that gap? And this is a pretty crucial check here. Almost everyone overestimates what they can spend in retirement. When you work out what needs to happen for you to be able to have a specific amount of spending, is it reasonable? Can you really stomach the amount of risk required? Or more pointedly, the amount you would need to save to get this retirement? Going through this process can help you negotiate with yourself and your spouse what the right approach is. However you decide to settle on your retirement spending goals, it is really important to go through the process. While you're young, it's not the worst thing in the world to just throw money at your 401k. But as you get closer to retirement, you need to be more strategic. You can't map out your path to retirement unless you know where you want to go. If this was helpful, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can see what we're up to. If you have any questions on this or any other questions that you'd like me to address, just drop them in the comments below. You can also check us out on the web at retirementresearcher.com and make sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we're doing.